today. So the body is amazing. It started taking on different features. And that's how we ended up with the so-called different races. Today, we have Europeans, we have Asians, we have Hispanics, but genetically, we are all connected. And science has proven this. And then when you look at, in terms of where human beings originated, the oldest fossils in the world are only found in Africa. So as Cheikh Anta Diop showed, there were 6 stages before we became what we now know as sapiens sapiens, us, modern man. Now, it is only in Africa that you find all the 6 stages, from 1 to 6. In other parts of the world, you find from 3 to 6, meaning they could not have originated in Asia or Europe or North America. They migrated to those parts of the world when they became erect and they could walk on 2 legs. Originally, man did not stand up erect, but once they could, you know, human beings are very curious and inquisitive. That's how they started spreading around the world, and that's how we took on the different features that we see today. So that's why when people talk about race and racism, it's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, we are all originated from Africa. So in effect, we are all brothers and sisters. We are all Africans. So some of the oldest fossils, for example, date to 3.2 million years. That's Dinknesh. Dinknesh was found in 1974 in Ethiopia. Another old fossil was found in East Africa as well, in Olduvai Gorge, in what is Tanzania today. And that one is called Zindanthropus. It was found in 1959 by Kenyans of European ancestry, the Likis, and they found it in Olduvai Gorge. And that one is dated to about 1.8 million years old. And then another major discovery was made in South Africa, in a place called the Tong region of South Africa. And that find was called the Tong Child, and is dated 2.3 million years old. So human beings originated primarily in what is now called the Great Lakes region in Kenya, Ethiopia, and extending along the Rift Valley all the way to South Africa. So the Great Lakes plus the Rift Valley. And then the earliest civilization started around the Nile, because of course, you know, water attracts people, and normally the Nile became very fertile along the banks because of the annual flooding, which would lay the very rich soil deposits. So that's why human beings congregated along the Nile and founded the highest standards of culture and civilization along the Nile, including Egypt. And there's no debate that since the original human beings were Africans, which means Egypt was an African civilization. There's some confusion because Egypt ultimately was invaded many times by outsiders, by the Assyrians, by the Greeks, by the Romans, and then finally, of course, by the Arab Muslim invasion of the 7th century, which is very recent when you look at the entire history of Egypt. The pre-dynastic Egypt before the pharaohs can go back 10,000 years old. That's when agriculture was founded, because man used to just be wandering around searching for food, you see? It is only when agriculture, which revolutionized human life, when man now found that you could now plant your food, you could settle, you don't have to spend your whole day walking, hiding from wild beasts and animals and being eaten up sometimes. Now you can build settlements because you can grow your food, you can keep your livestock, and that's how society started to become more sophisticated. Some remained loose communities, some became very highly sophisticated civilizations. In addition to Egypt, which I just mentioned, we had Aksum, which eventually became Ethiopia. You have Nuba. You had in West Africa, the great kingdoms of Songhai, of Mali, of ancient Ghana, not the modern Ghana that we have today, but ancient Ghana from the 3rd century, lasting all the way through to the 18th century. And then after that, you had the empires of Mali and Songhai and so forth. And then you had the empires of Congo. So Africa was very highly civilized before some European countries even existed. Britain did not exist until the 10th century. So Britain is just yesterday compared to African civilizations. Okay, so now let me just jump forward a little bit. Most of these African societies were very sophisticated in trade. So if you do your research, you will find that every African community engaged either in trading with their neighbors, which is very sad, because nowadays, most of Africa's trade is with the outside world, not between and amongst Africans. But in those days, primarily the trade was from East to West Africa, to Central Africa, to Southern Africa. There's the trans-Saharan trade, that we know in history. Even as early as the 14th century, the East African coast was trading with China because they can find the remains of porcelains from China, even along, not only on the coast, but even as far inside as what was called the Empire of Zimbabwe, where you have the great ruins of Zimbabwe. When Europeans saw the ruins for the first time, they couldn't believe this could have been built by Africans, They said, oh, no. It must have been built by Europeans who then somehow disappeared, And then we move on to an unfortunate era, the era of enslavement, which primarily started from the 15th century through the Portuguese first, and then other Europeans joined in this enterprise. And that was very disruptive for Africa because it eliminated millions of Africans, unfortunately. For many centuries, Africa was the only region in the world where the population did not increase. So that was the very devastating impact of enslavement from the 15th century to the 19th century. And then after the 19th century, Europeans formally colonized Africa. So they had a meeting in the Berlin Conference, everybody's familiar with that, where France got a slice of Africa, Britain got a slice, Belgium got a slice, Spain got a slice, Italy got a slice, Germany got a slice, all of them, they partitioned Africa and arrested Africa's development for another 80 to 90 years. That's how long the colonial regime lasted in Africa. And then, as you know, most African countries won their independence in the 1960s. However, unfortunately, the independence was largely on paper alone. So even though now we have African presidents, African prime ministers, the theft of Africa's economy and Africa's politics has remained in most African countries. That has never been resolved. So most African so-called leaders actually serve the interest of the former empire. And that is why the problems we see in Africa are very common, whether it's in Chad, whether it's in Uganda, whether it's in Gabon, whether it's in Cameroon, the problems are similar. And what are those problems? Poverty. Why is that? How can such a rich continent be so poor? It's very simple. Because most of the profit from our resources are still enjoyed by the countries that used to colonize us. So we don't have any control over the rich resources that we sell to the world. The gold, the diamond, the oil, the gas, they tell us what price they want to buy it for. Think about that.
This is, I just want to interject.
Yes, of course.
It sounds like this is how indirect rule looks like versus direct rule. Like in the case of apartheid. Apartheid would be direct rule, and how we have African prime ministers and African presidents who serve the interests of Europeans. That's indirect rule, correct?
Well, I would say it's just a matter of semantics. Most of them were very repressive and oppressive at the same time. So, for example, when we talk about indirect and direct rule, the British like to say that they had indirect rule. They allowed African institutions to continue functioning, but that is not true because they imposed their regime upon those institutions. So, for example, let's look at Uganda, where you had the empire of Buganda. The British claimed they allowed the kingdom to continue functioning. But who was responsible for the tax? Who was responsible for the budget at the end of the day? Who made the decision how to spend the money? Who made the decision over foreign policy, over military affairs? It was the British.
That's right.
So when they say indirect rule, it's superficial. It's not true. It was very direct. They made you feel like it was indirect. You know, it was France. France had a different system. France claimed that their African subjects could eventually become French Africans. And that was, of course, very superficial. And in a place like Senegal, it never worked. The people who chose to be quote unquote French Africans were very few relative to the entire population because they wanted to be Senegalese. They were proud to be Africans. It's like Senegalese going to France and saying, oh, you have a choice of becoming French Senegalese. How many Frenchmen would sign up for that, you know? But they were so arrogant because they thought their culture was much more high and civilized because they were not aware of the history of Africa. And unfortunately, many Africans are also not aware of the history of Africa. So even today in the 21st century, we find Africans who aspire to be more, quote unquote, civilized. And what do they mean by that? They mean by rejecting the African culture, the African heritage, and adopting European culture and heritage. And that to them is so-called civilization, which is completely wrong. And let me give you a quick example. And then I will allow you, because I'm sure you might want to pose some questions. But let me give you this example very quickly. I appreciate China. Extremely, I appreciate China. China used to be the playing field for the West as well. They used to invade China, occupy China, plunder resources from China, keep the Chinese fighting amongst themselves. They had all these warlords in China. China ended that with the Chinese Revolution. So whether you support the Chinese Revolution or not, or whether you support China's politics or not, what they did cannot be debated. They ended Western exploitation of China, unified China. And within 50 years, China has become a global power. Many people don't know this. Let me give you just one more fact, and then I'll pause. In 1959, the per capita income of Ghana was about $200. The per capita income of China at that time was $98. Just think about that. In other words, Ghana per capita income was double that of China. But today, China is a power because China controls its resources and it uses it to develop China. If it wants to sell something to the outside world, it decides what price it wants to sell it for. And it decides if it wants to buy products from the outside world at a price that it is willing to pay. But Africa has remained the same way as it was in 1959. We don't control the price that we sell for ours. How can we even call it our resources if we don't control the price we sell it for? You see? And that is the dilemma that every African country faces today. And Kwame Nkrumah proposed a solution in the 1950s and 1960s when he was first Prime Minister of Ghana and then President. He said, listen, we have so much resources. We're very wealthy. But if we don't unite and protect our resources together as the United States of Africa, we will not be able to protect our sovereignty and our resources. And he has been proven right, 100% right. Africa has failed to protect its sovereignty and its resources. That is why you have the continent that is the wealthiest and also the most impoverished at the same time. Our leadership have failed us completely, whether it's Uganda, Chad, or any other African country.
I want to go back on something that you said. So in the colonial period, the British decided based on certain anthropological assumptions about Africans that they would assign different roles, different characteristics to Africans.
Yes.
And since then, these distributions of these assigned roles and characteristics, they've led to things like a militarized north in Uganda and an
Yes.
aristocratic south in Uganda. Can you give an overview as to how this has played out and how the country is run, how the government is run, and also what can we expect in the future if we're to dismantle and to let go of these assumed characteristics?
Yes, we have to let go because that is the only way we can build a harmonious country, a harmonious Africa. It's not only in Uganda that that policy was adopted. In what is now the separate countries of Sudan and South Sudan, when it was run as one colonial empire by the British and the Egyptians, the northern part was favored and the south was discriminated against and militarized. So they became the soldiers in the country, you know, and ultimately led to that fratricidal war and a split between North and South. Then now they're two separate countries. In Uganda, the same thing, you know, the people in the North were seen as the militarized, good to be in the military by the British, while the southern part was where most of the investment and development was concentrated. And that has led to the polarization which exists with us even up today. And the British were very good in divide and rule. And let me give you one more example, and then I come back to Uganda. In Guyana, a British colony also in the Caribbean, in South America, the British exploited the labor from Africans taken there during the enslavement era, African Guyanese. And then when slavery was abolished, started importing people from India and brought them there to undermine the Africans, because now that slavery was abolished, you could not force them to work on the plantations. So they brought indentured labor from India and kept the Indians fighting with the Africans instead of focusing their energy on the colonial exploitator, the British, the owners of the capital. Kept fighting among themselves, and today in the 21st century, the politics in Guyana is still based on ethnic parties. One party supported by Indians, one supported by Africans, and they always have this conflict, sometimes even leading to bloody confrontation. In Uganda, we have had that same experience with our politics, with the military and police forces at one time, dominated by people from the North, who continued that legacy of the British recruitment even after independence. So when you say, how would dismantling that help? Of course, it would help tremendously, because now politics would not be based on ethnicities or nationalities. That's the only way we can start building a nation state, not in Uganda, but in other African countries, to support that same model. But also, I want to add one other factor that has played in, that is interconnected and interrelated. These nationalities and ethnic hostilities has been exploited by politicians, as you know. Normally, African people get along regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your nationality, regardless of what part of the country or continent you come from. But politicians have always exploited that for political gain. So you could say the example is how in the United States, for example, politicians exploit race and racism for political gains and for votes. In Africa, politicians exploit ethnicity and ethnic differences to also gain votes. And the worst and most horrific escalation was what we see in a country like Rwanda or Burundi, where it is based on so-called Hutu, so-called Tutsi, exploit that. It has resulted in genocide in both countries repeatedly in Africa.
That's right. So does a democratic dispensation actually resolve this question of a Ugandan state?
Absolutely. In fact, it does. When we say democratic dispensation, it means the resources has to be distributed harmoniously. It means political power cannot be monopolized by any one ethnic group. It means regional governments have to be strong and firm, and central governments be an agreement between these different regions. So for Uganda, for example, an appropriate in Kenya, they're using what they call devolution, decentralizing government in Kenya. In Uganda, it might be something like that. It might be something like a federal system, which is not abused by the central government. A federal system which would have the power of collecting resources domestically and let the central government handle foreign affairs and common military, national defense for the military. But let the local governments handle what the local government is best at doing, administering the local regions. So it can work. The opposite, of course, is to continue with the kind of centralized military dictatorship that we have in Africa, which has completely failed in human terms and economic terms. In economic terms, it has kept Africa the most impoverished continent of all the continents. And in human terms, it has resulted in the deaths of millions of Africans and the departure of millions of talented Africans who are seeking better pastures overseas in other countries when they could be developing Africa.
That's right. So it occurs that the democratic dispensation is expressed or fully expressed in the campaign and in the campaign of Bobi Wine and the NUP, would you say?
Absolutely. In the case of Bobi Wine, obviously, he is the voice of the youth. He represents the youth. In Uganda, we have had this dictator for 35 years now. And my brother will speak about Chad. I think the one they had was there for 31 years. In Cameroon, we have a guy who's been there for 40 plus years. We can't have that in Africa. So obviously, Bobi Wine is under 40. And as you know, about 80% of the country's population is under the age of 35. So obviously, that is why he won the elections. He has just been prevented from being sworn in. You know, the dictator is stealing the election, just like the same way that Deby was doing the same thing in Chad. That is only one part of the element, though. Once Museveni is removed and a Bobi Wine is sworn in as a president, he has a lot of work ahead of him because the dictator has really ruined the country on many levels. Psychologically, he has made corruption normal. He has normalized corruption so that even decent people now expect to get paid to do something that they're supposed to be doing without getting paid.
That's
you
right.
see?
That's right.
It's become part of the system. So Bobi Wine's work, and it's not his work really, it is going to be the work of every Ugandan to support him. And I've seen many of his programs, very progressive, and I think his programs are implemented. Uganda will be toward the path of really building the Ugandans that the leaders who fought for independence in the 1950s, the vision they had for Uganda, we can still realize that vision. But so long as we have a dictator in power for 35 years, Uganda can never achieve that.
Thank you so much, Milton, for this very brief overview of our history, both yesteryear and in the years to come. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, well, Jody, Milton has brought to life the saying that goes that knowledge is power.
That's right.
Yeah, really, we as Africans, we feel empowered because we have been in darkness and in ignorance for many decades and many years, and that's a justification to why Africans and Africa looks to be weak. So we really appreciate you, Milton. Thank you so much for the wonderful insights, discoveries. We will be having you again and again. So viewers, please stay with us a little longer, our viewers, as we expect many, many questions. And we also want you to meet our next guest from Chad. And please welcome our next guest, Vori. And Vori is the founder of Africans in Boston. Vori, welcome to Your Voice. We welcome you so much to Your Voice. And Vori, we want you to share with us why you started the organization Africans in Boston and we would want you to lead the conversation into the situation in Chad.
Yes, so thank you very much for having me on your show today. It's really an honor. Yes, Africans in Boston is an organization that was founded here in the Boston area with the goal of bringing together people of African descent and people that are interested in Africa with a common agenda, a common goal to make the African voice a little stronger in Massachusetts and beyond, and New England. So we like to bring people that are in different places in Africa and have, talk about how we could help African in the diaspora be better, thrive economically, work together to have a common agenda and have a common voice when they're trying to, put together their or further their interest locally, whether it's about acquiring property, getting jobs, working with the local state officials. That's kind of the agenda and the goal beyond African in Boston. So at the beginning, we realized that if you only bring a small group of individuals, if you only target the Chadian community is too small. And as you know, powers are in the numbers. If you're only bringing a few Chadians, your voice is not going to matter much. But the powers are going to come if you bring the entire African community together. It's a stronger voice. And it comes with a lot of challenges, because I know these days in 2021, Pan-Africanism is a very popular concept. Everybody is a Pan-Africanist. But we are also very divided and weak, and we have a lot of challenges to come strong as an entity. So that's in a nutshell some of the things that we're trying to do with Africans in Boston. As you mentioned, I am from Chad, a country that has been in the news recently with the death of President Deby. Now, Mr. Milton did a pretty good overview, some sort of historical and analysis of where African countries stand in 2021, which is a pretty, I would say, dark picture, right? 50 years after the years of the independence, African countries find themselves back to square one. We haven't been able to thrive economically. We haven't been able to thrive democratically. We haven't been able to develop the country to at a point where we could say 60 years later, this is what we've done. And then we could look at the example of countries like Singapore and East Asia, where those countries have done far much better than African countries. Now, I'm not going to go here and try to do an analysis of the entire African continent. That's beyond my pedigree. I would narrow the focus on maybe Chad and Central Africa, because Chad is just a little microcosm of what's happening in Central Africa. A lot of social unrest these days. We're going from crisis to crisis. What most of the time when people hear about Chad is about war, rebellions, and people dying, or Chad being ranked at the bottom of the Human Development Index when it comes to metrics put together by institutions like the World Bank or even the UN. So we had a president that passed away. The official story is he died fighting rebels that came from the north to fight the current regime. So the situation in Chad is actually there's a lot of similarities between what Milton described in Uganda. President Deby has been in power for 31 years. And it's a very, very, he's considered a strong man, supported by France and quote unquote the international community in the name of the fight against terrorism. And that's what the international community and France are doing to support, or has done to support Idriss Deby. Even though the common sense, and that's what a lot of people, the Chadian people, or some people in the opposition, are saying that the link, the support should be towards the Chadian people. So if we're going to be linking some sort of a contract between France and Chad, or the international community and Chad, why not do that contract between the international community or France and the Chadian people, as opposed to linking it to one man and his ethnic group? Okay, Chad is not just one person. Chad is we have a multi-ethnic, diverse group of people living in Chad, multiple languages. Chad is not just Idriss Déby and his clan. So, and if tomorrow Idriss Déby is gone, Chad will continue. And that's the strategy that a lot of the people in the opposition and some people in Chad are advocating. Let's look out for the people of Chad, because every single time, in the name, again, of fighting against terrorism in the Sahel, and in the name of the stability in the region, the United Nations, the international community, and France wants to support one man. Now, it's going to create frustration. Idriss Déby has been there for 31 years. A lot of emphasis is being put on the military, arming the military, getting weapons, sending the military overseas to Mali, to Niger, to Cameroon, to Nigeria. The country is overstretched. So if the budget of the country, the national budget, is the bulk of it is allocated to buying weapons, supporting the military, how are you going to develop the country? How about infrastructure? How are you going to build roads? How are you going to provide electricity, water? So that's the sacrifice that is currently being made by the Chadian people in the name of the fight against terrorism, and in the name in the name of the stability in the region. So it came to a point where Idriss Déby is 68 years old. There is a crisis. So some people choose to form a rebellion with the chaos in what's happening in Libya. There are armed groups or people that have decided to fight with weapons to take down the regime. There are people that are trying to do it internally by being civilians, by forming political parties, and by going to the elections. But people know very well that for 31 years, the election in Chad have not been fair. So if you have a situation where you're not having changes via democratic elections, and you're not having changes, via the international community or France, or even the support of any other African nations, how would you like people to react? Of course, people are going to rebel. There will be rebellions. Idriss Déby himself was a rebel. That's how he came to power in 1990. He was a rebel that rebelled against Hissène Habré at the time, and he went and found some support in Sudan, and somehow got the support of the French to come to N'Djamena and take the power. So he had an opportunity to turn the country around and try to have more democratic institutions and really turn things around by having elections that could be credible, so that we could have a one elected or democratic elected president in Chad. That never happened. And look at how he ended. That's a very tragic death for a president. That didn't have to be the end of the story. The story could have ended in another way. So it's very interesting, especially in Central Africa. You have the kind of similar situation. Cameroon, Paul Biya has been there for quite a while. The Congo, Sassou Nguesso has been there for quite a while. We all know what's happening in Gabon. And here we have Chad. And then we are surrounded, for those that don't understand Chad a little bit, Chad is at a very geostrategic location. We have Libya in the north, Sudan in the east, Niger in the west, Cameroon and Nigeria in the southwest, and Central African Republic in the south. So Sudan is a very, it's not an easy neighbor to have. There's been a lot of crises in the Darfur. And we all know the crisis that Libya has been going through since Gaddafi was gone. And then you have Niger and the Sahel, Niger, Cameroon with Boko Haram and all the instability and that is happening for the past 10, 15 years. So Chad is in a very, very tough situation.
Well, sorry to cut you short, Vori. This is really, really interesting, and I could not help but just draw the similarities between the two nations, Uganda and Chad. So it's really interesting, and we would love to have you back on the show and you tell the people what's happening. So what I want you to finish or end with, what's your final message to the Africans and to the people in the diaspora and to the Africans at large concerning Chad? What's your final take? What's your final message?
So thank you for this opportunity. My message is Africans needs to come together. Okay. A lot of the time when we hear the situation in Uganda or the situation in Chad, if I feel like I'm from Niger or Cameroon or from South Africa, I feel a little bit disconnected with that reality. We're not involved. We're just spectator, and then we're just commenting and asking our Chadian or Ugandan friend, hey, what's happening in Uganda? We need to be more involved, especially this new generation, so that we can have a new social contract among ourselves, African. This new generation need to do better than the previous generation, so that if we have a social contract where if somebody comes into power and they say they're going to be president for 5 years, with maybe the possibility of being president for another 5 years, we need to hold that individual accountable for that reality. And not just the Chadian, the Ugandan also needs to do that. If somebody comes into power for 5 years and after 5 years they're reelected for another 5 and they decide to change the constitution, every African should get involved and should say no to that. We cannot allow Uganda to do that, Chad to do that and say, okay, oh, we're Ghana, we're fine. We have an elected, democratically elected president. Because what happened in Ghana, what happened in Chad or what happened in Uganda eventually would have to affect what's going to happen in Ghana. So my message is to Africans. This is a new generation, okay? We know, like Milton said, and we could say it over and over, the previous generation failed in many, many different ways. And we could go over that. But however, we have an opportunity, us, the new generation. What are we going to do to change things? If we are indeed true about being real Pan-Africanist, like everybody claims these days, what are we doing for Africa? And then what we need to be together and have institutions beyond the African Union that could act and have a strong voice. So the African Union is not a very strong institution. So that's why at our level, we have organizations like Africans in Boston, and we want Africans in Boston to be very strong. If something happened in Uganda or Chad that we feel like it's not the way to go, the way to move forward, we need to condemn it. We need to make a strong statement. And we need to be able to prove that we can make change wherever we are as Africans. If we could not do that, 60 years from today, we'll be here talking about what happened in 2021 and how we didn't make it happen. That's my message to African people.
Wow, thank you so much, Vori. That's very wonderful, and what a wonderful way to end that discussion. Really, we just encourage you to, as Vori said, don't be spectators, but be the change that you want to see, be the change that you want to happen. So thank you so much, Vori. And Milton, would you care if you draw a conclusion and give us your final take on what Vori has been saying and relating to the two nations? Milton, are you there?
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, Vori, for your presentation and the words you concluded with. And I agree with you totally. In fact, I host a radio show in New York on WBAI 99.5 FM. And in fact, I would like to host you in a few weeks. A few weeks ago, I hosted a brother from Chad. His name is Christian Jimra Komtog. And we discussed the Chadian issues. And we said, yes, it has to be an African issue, not a Chadian issue, so that the Ugandan issue should also be a Ugandan issue. And I'm happy to say that when Ugandans had a protest outside the United Nations several weeks ago, some people from Chad joined that protest. And that's the way it should be, you know? And I agree with you absolutely. The abuse of constitution in any African country must outrage every African. And what is going on in Uganda right now, I invite Africans from other African countries to join us. In the case of Chad, the support comes from France. In the case of Uganda, the support has come historically from the United States and from Britain. So we've been putting a lot of activism and protest on the administration in the US and in the UK. And now it's bearing some fruit. And we would invite sisters and brothers from Chad, any other African country, to join us in pressing forward our demands. So for example, right now we have a petition that's already been signed by more than 8,000 people on change.org. And the petition is it's been calling for targeted sanctions against Ugandan political and military establishment that are involved in the human rights abuse. It's been calling for an arms embargo. Why are we selling weapons to General Museveni when we know the arms are not used to defend Ugandans, but rather to kill Ugandans? And that petition is, of course, on change.org. So anybody can go to change.org. And the petition says, the headline is, international community do not recognize Uganda's rigged elections and no arms to Uganda. If you look, you search, you can find that, add your name to that petition. We must all start working together. So if our sisters and brothers from Chad call us to participate in any civil event, any protest, we should join them. Wherever an African dictator is crushing Africans, let's join them. And in Uganda, the dictator who's trying to steal the elections has announced that he's going to swear himself in on May 12. On April 16, the United States Secretary of State put out a statement announcing targeted sanctions on some Ugandans in the administration who are abusing human rights. And he also said something very critical. He said, the elections were neither free nor fair, which means you cannot go to the swearing in of General Museveni if you already publicly said in a statement, the elections are neither free nor fair, which means Museveni did not win those elections. So we, Ugandans and other Africans interested in Ugandan struggle right now, let's make a demand upon the United States administration, the British administration, and the other EU countries, do not attend the so-called swearing in of somebody who did not win elections.
Yeah,
Those
thank you so much, Milton. I wanted you to summarize by talking in just 30 seconds, because time is not on our side, talking about the overwhelming debt the government of Uganda has accumulated, a staggering 65 trillion, that is 18 billion US dollars in public debt from 49 trillion that we had, from 13 billion US dollar that we had in 2019. So the country's debt is set to surpass 50% threshold in 2022. So what do you have to say about that very, very shortly in 30 seconds, because yes, we want to change gears?
I don't need more than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The World Bank and the IMF do not agree with General Museveni's request to suspend the interest payment on those debts. He's not authorized to negotiate on behalf of Uganda and Uganda's debts because he's not the legitimate president of Uganda. If he resigns and Bobi Wine is sworn in, then negotiate with Bobi Wine. He's asking for more debt. Can you imagine? He's asking for more money. No, don't give him a penny. Swear in the right president and then negotiate. That's what I say.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We appreciate you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Judy.
I was actually going to have a follow-up question because we actually have a little more time than we thought we had.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you what you thought about the rehiring of Mercury by Museveni to try and to clean up his public image, because he recently rehired Mercury. That
well, what can I even say? It's like throwing money in a dark hole, because the PR firm has been paid all this money, and what has the PR firm accomplished in this time? When Donald Trump was president, even Donald Trump's State Department said the campaign that was ongoing before the elections, when people were being beaten, people were being kidnapped, said these elections are fundamentally flawed. So this was from the Trump administration. So obviously this PR agency that's taking all the Ugandan taxpayers' money has not been able to accomplish anything. So it just shows that he's wasting Ugandan taxpayer money, and the PR firm is not going to accomplish anything. When the US tells, the US gives Uganda $1 billion a year, but now the same US is telling you that the elections are not free or fair, it means they're telling you to resign. And we have to keep pressing that demand until he resigns.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Milton.
Thank you both.
Yeah, we appreciate you. So, Judy, do you have any final remarks as we change gears and we want to, do we have callers? We want to have callers. Callers, if you're there and you have any questions you want to call, our producers are going to put the number on your screens, and you feel free to engage with us in this discussion. It's about your voice. That's why we call this program Your Voice. Your voice counts and matters. So if you're there and you want to call in, ask any question to this gentleman, this is your time.
I feel very excited after this conversation, this history lesson. This history lesson as to what we can actually do. Yeah, with the protests coming up, and the new this new administration getting ready to swear in. It really puts fire under our feet to really take the actions that are necessary, because like the actions that we've been taking, the protesting, the reaching out to our senators, our representatives, we've been actually producing results. Like these sanctions are the aftermath of our taking the actions and really pushing for our senators to do what we elected them to do. And so I'm excited to see what we'll be able to really make happen in the coming weeks.
And the upcoming protest, I heard that Ugandans are having an upcoming protest before the swearing of the president in Uganda.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So that is this coming Friday, the 7th of May. And they're going to be in Washington, D.C.
Okay, we have a caller, Judy.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello? Yes, we can hear you.
Like I said, this is Suga, Massachusetts. First and foremost, I need to make something clear. There is no amount of public relations that can bandage dictatorship and human rights violations and kidnaps and tortures that Mr. Museveni is inflicting on Ugandans. There is nothing. The only PR Uganda needs is respect for human rights. That's one. Two is the rule of law, and then respecting the constitution of Uganda. Mr. Museveni should respect the will of Ugandans and step aside and let the voice of Ugandans reign. That's one. Two, it's a simple question to Mr. Alimadi. We've talked about unity among Africans, but it seems we are kind of detached from each other as Africans, Africa is more like a country, but it seems each country, as a country, Africa is more like a family in one home. But it seems these the different stakeholders in this family are detached from each other. So how do we mobilize for this unity? How do we get all the Africans, all the young people in the different countries to come together to realize the need for unity? Because the late Kwame Nkrumah hinted on it, and he said Africa needs to unite.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. And your name, please? Okay, so we got Marvin. Thank you so much. Milton, do you want to answer that very briefly?
Yes, of course. I appreciate the questions. Thank you so much. It can be done. When Bobi Wine visited Kenya, you saw the turnout by the youth in Kenya. Massive turnout. When Bobi Wine visited South Africa, you saw the massive turnout by South African youth as well as Ugandans. So Africans have this common bondage. It can easily be done. So for example, in the diaspora, when we do the protests, now that I have some contacts in the Chadian community, I have some contacts in the community of people from Cameroon. I'm going to get
just a little bit, Milton. Let's first take this caller. You will join all these questions together as you answer them.
Fine.
Hello. Yes, your name, please, and where are you calling from?
Thank you very much to all the panelists for this lovely program.
Your name and where are you calling from?
Thank you so much, Mr. Alimadi. My name is Ivan Bruce Sendege. I'm calling from Bristol, England.
Okay.
My question is, I have two questions. The first question is, Uganda accumulated a lot of debts, whereby even Congo we are owing Congo more than $10 billion worth of debts, to which those debts we don't even know how they accumulated, because we know none of any Ugandans benefited from any of these debts. So my question is towards that debt issue to Mr. Alimadi or any of you, the panelists. Is Uganda really eligible to pay any of those loans? Because in the first place, Mr. Museveni, all those debts we understand from the IMF, from all the international banks, they were taken not on behalf of Ugandans, but illegally. Because those debts, none of those debts benefited any of Ugandans, and we don't even know the accountability. They don't have any accountability of where all that money disappeared to or what it did. So are we really liable to pay those debts as a Uganda, as a government? Yet the president of Uganda actually, since 81, has been an illegal president of Uganda in the first place. So are we really liable to pay those debts as the government? And secondly, the United States and the UK, these European governments, they've been supporting Museveni. And as I'm speaking right now, they are still supporting Museveni somehow, sending money through like some charities and all that. Are we doing enough to stop any form of funds that are going to Uganda? Because we know very well none of these funds are benefiting any Ugandans apart from getting into these people's pockets.
Oh,
thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Okay, we have Henry also, Henry Masembe calling in. Yes, Henry.
Hello guys. Hold on, let me mute you on the other one. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Henry Masembe. Thank you.
All right, my question goes to Dr. Alimadi. Dr. Alimadi, if you can hear me, thank you very much for joining us. My question really goes to what you were talking about. We hear a lot of these leaders all over Africa, the old guys like Museveni talking about Pan-Africanism. And to us, the young people, when they hear us talk about Pan-Africanism, they say that we don't know what we're talking about. If you saw Mr. Museveni in meetings with other African leaders, they talk about the past. And if you are 40, 35, and you tell them that you guys are old, we need to, we are the young people, we are the future. You've always told us that we are the future. This is the future. They say that you want to destabilize what they know, like the past. They are so into the past that they are afraid of handing over to the young people to pioneer the future. How could you advise, like, first of all, us the young people, and to countries like the US who have trusted Museveni and like the Chad president who just passed to be the policeman of Africa, and like Museveni right now, he's the policeman of Central Africa. How can you encourage, or like us who tweet and demonstrate here, how could we talk to these nations that you can trust us? We are young, we might not have been here for the last 70 years, but how can we move forward with the young people?
Thank you so much, Henry. Yeah, we're going to have two more callers, and then we'll give Milton an opportunity to answer and respond to your questions. Do we have any more callers? If you want to call and get part of this discussion, feel free. The number is on your screens. So feel free to call and get part of this discussion. Milton or Vori, on behalf of Chad, will respond and answer to your questions. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Milton, you can go on in the meantime as we wait for more.
Sure. All right, so I think I had partly already answered the first caller who was talking about the need to how can we have common protest and activities? And I said, basically, we have to make sure that we don't only invite people from the Ugandan community. Let's develop contacts with other African organizations, like my brother Vuri, who's on this show. Now I have his contact. I'm going to be in touch with him, and other organizations that I'm in touch with. Make sure they come to our event, so it can easily be done, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Britain, any other country where African diaspora exists right now. In terms of the second caller, he asked about the debt that has been incurred to international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank. And he asked whether we should even be responsible for paying those debts that were taken by illegitimate rulers. You know, unfortunately, we will be responsible, even though I agree with you. I've written about it that morally and legally we should not be responsible because you knew you were dealing with an illegitimate leader. But unfortunately, let's say in Uganda, if Bobby Wine were to say that as president, I would not honor those debts, that would be a problem because they would cut him off from further financing. Sadly, that's how they operate. But this is one thing that I think can be done. You could insist that, number one, do not give any more money to Museveni since you know he's illegitimate. The US Secretary of State has now joined us in saying the election was neither free nor fair. So World Bank and IMF and the US has a controlling interest in these establishments. How can you give more money to somebody who the Secretary of State said was not legitimate? So we can make that argument very effectively to make sure it does not get any more funds and it does not get to renegotiate the loans. And if we do that effectively, that eventually could force him to resign. Let's make sure we cut off all financing to the regime, and that might force him to resign. In fact, his own colleagues in government, the politicians and even the military, might force him to resign. The caller also had another question on the debt to the Congo. You know why Uganda owes Congo $10 billion? Because Uganda invaded and occupied Congo from 2003 to 2005 and killed many Congolese and plundered resources. And the Congo took Uganda to what is called the World Court, the ICJ International Court of Justice, and they had a trial. Both sides had lawyers, and the court found in favor of the Congo and said Uganda should pay the reparations. And in fact, it could even be more than that amount if you add in the interest. And okay, so here's what my proposal is. Ugandans should talk independently to the Congo and say Congo should be willing to suspend that debt if Museveni resigns. And if Museveni resigns, then Congo can renegotiate that with Uganda. Maybe instead of 13 billion, the Congo can say, yes, Museveni did not destroy only Uganda, but by invading Congo, destroyed the Congo as well. So Uganda, we are willing to forgive you. Maybe just pay us 1 billion and pay it over 10 years. We can arrange something like that, but not with Museveni, with President Bobi Wine, not with President Museveni. The third caller, first of all, please, not Dr. Milton, just call me Milton or Brother Milton, please. The third caller talked about how can we really convince these countries that support Museveni, even though you're of a younger generation, that you would be able to run the country successfully, that they should no longer be listening to Museveni. I think you're in a very good position right now, because in the US, a number of things are happening. You have a new administration, which is very diverse, which is bringing people from all ethnic and racial backgrounds, which is bringing on a lot of young people, even though the president himself is in his 70s. He understands the importance of diversity and the importance of youth. And then the other thing that is also happening since the killing of George Floyd last year. The Black Lives Movement, which was already becoming significant, moved into even a much more effective and higher stage. So issues related to people of African descent are now being paid very close attention to in the United States. And we can easily extend the argument and say that it should not only be descendants of Africa, but it also should be Africans on the continent. We should take that struggle there. And I think if we use that approach effectively, we can get the administration to listen to us. And our demand is we should end dictatorships generally in African countries, and in our case specifically in Uganda. Do not recognize Museveni. Start by not sending the US ambassador to the so-called swearing in on May the 12th. Let him be there alone with his friends and swear himself in as president if he wants.
Thank you so much. And we have come to the close of our program. Thank you so much, Milton and Vori, for great insights and discussions. Thank you. Judy, your closing remarks.
Yes. Before we get to the closing remarks, we want to get to the portion of our show where we did title it, What Can I Do? And in this portion, we give you an action to take. And so we wanted to also let you know that this coming the 7th of May, there is a protest. And we've had several protests around the world, several protests here in Massachusetts, some in New York, some in Washington, D.C. But this protest is specific as it is towards the Mercury Public Affairs. This is the lobby firm that Museveni has hired to attempt to clean up his image to the world. And so we're going to be starting there the protest on the 7th of this week. And that protest starts at 10:30 a.m. and goes until 4 p.m. And in the past, we've been able to, through our protesting, we were able to have scribe strategies and advisors who were also hired by the Museveni regime to actually take a back seat from participating and partnering with the NRM government. So this protest is specifically to direct our attention to this lobby firm and to let them know that it's not okay to have partnership with this dictator, and you cannot clean up what he's done. There's no way to wash the blood off of his hands. So I believe we have the poster up that we're going to show you that is already up, and it's the Free Uganda protest happening this weekend, this coming weekend. Also, we want to continue to challenge you to reach out to your senators and let them know what's happening. Invite them to vote yes on the Menendez Resolution 807 on Uganda. We want to ask you to continue to share this program with friends of Uganda, English speakers, near and far, so that we can bring our voices together with Pan-Africans, Friends to Africa, as we learned today that we all originated from Africa, so we're all siblings. And siblings do best together when we fight together. Yes? So again, thank you for your time spent with us today. Thank you for your attention. We want to say thank you again to our two fabulous guests. Thank you, Milton. Thank you, Vori, for being with us. And we look forward to having you here again with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I am David Chilavira, your host.
And I'm Judy Bukenya.
Have a wonderful night. Have a good night to all of you.
Good night.